Number 6, God is the best explanation of objective moral values and duties in the world. In moral experience, we apprehend moral values and duties which impose themselves as objectively binding and true. For example, we all recognize that it's wrong to walk into an elementary school with an automatic weapon and to shoot little boys and girls and their teachers. On a naturalistic view, however, there's nothing really wrong with this. Moral values are just the subjective byproducts of biological evolution and social conditioning. Dr. Rosenberg is brutally honest about the implications of his atheism. He writes, "There is no such thing as morally right or wrong. Individual human life is meaningless and without ultimate moral value. We need to face the fact that nihilism is true." By contrast, the theist grounds objective moral values in God and our moral duties in his commands. The theist thus has the explanatory resources which the atheist lacks to ground objective moral values and duties. Hence, we may argue, 1, objective moral values and duties exist. 2, but if God did not exist, objective moral values and duties would not exist, from which it follows 3, therefore, God exists.
Let's turn to something much more accessible, objective values. Now, Dr. Craig's argument that only God can underwrite objective values was refuted by Plato in 390 BC in an argument that he gives in the first and the simplest of his dialogues, the Euthyphro. I'm very tempted to say to Dr. Craig, what part of no Euthyphro don't you understand? The question that Plato raises in the Euthyphro goes like this: take your favorite moral norm. Gay marriage is forbidden, or FGM is required, or thou shalt not kill. Take your favorite moral norm. Ask yourself this question: is it morally right because God chose it, or did God choose it because it's morally right? We all know the answer to this question. The answer to this question is God chose it because it's morally right. And what that means, of course, is that the moral rightness of thou shalt not kill is entirely independent fact from God's choosing it. It's because he recognized the moral rightness of thou shalt not kill that he imposed it on us. And that means that the mere fact that it's God who imposed it on us doesn't explain the nature of objective value. It's that further fact that he was wise enough and smart enough to detect about thou shalt not kill that made it the morally right value for us. Okay? And this is a point that Socrates makes to Euthyphro in the first and simplest of the dialogues. And it is a problem that theological ethics has wrestled with ever since. The only option in responding to this argument is the divine command theory, a theory that has had its exponents all the way back to William of Ockham. And the trouble with divine command theory is that in order to articulate that theory, in order to defend it, in order to make it sound plausible, you have to already commit yourself to there being some normative fact, some moral fact about the moral rules that make them right, independent of God saying, you do it or you go to hell. Okay? There's a rightness about moral norms that cannot be exhausted by the mere fact that it was handed down on the mountain by Moses from God. Now, natural selection is a theory, of course, about how we came to be moral, why we're moral, about what the ecological conditions are that made us moral. It explains our morality, but it doesn't necessarily explain away our morality. That requires something else, okay? And the suggestion that without God, the naturalist, the Darwinian, has no basis on which to underwrite his normative commitment, that again is bluff, and in fact, it's the person who claims that it's God that gave normative morality to us, that explains its normative rightness, is the person who has, regrettably to use the expression that Dr. Craig so invokes, the burden of proof of explaining what is it about God that makes for the moral rightness of the ethical norms that he imposes on us. And there are, of course, any number of alternative ethical theories that underwrite the objectivity of ethics, among them utilitarianism and social contract theory and ideal observer theory and Hume's theory of the sympathies and the Kantian theory of the categorical imperative. And the real problem for Dr. Craig is he needs to refute each of these normative theories in order to show that there's no other basis for ethics than God, and the resources that he would use to cast doubt on these theories also cast doubt on the divine command theory.
As for objective moral values, in his book, he admits that naturalism faces an even worse problem than the Euthyphro Dilemma. For the theist, the Euthyphro Dilemma is easy to solve. Namely, you craft a third alternative, that God himself is the good, and that his commands are necessary expressions of his moral nature. So they are neither arbitrary, nor is the good something external to God. But on Dr. Rosenberg's view, there is no basis for moral value or moral objectivity, and that's why he is a moral nihilist who doesn't think that anything is truly right or wrong. As for objective moral values, it's the same situation. Dr. Rosenberg rightly understands that if atheism is true, if metaphysical naturalism is true, there are no objective moral values and duties. He and I actually agree on a great deal. But what I would say is, obviously, it is wrong to do certain things, and therefore it follows that there must be a foundation for moral values beyond the physical world in God, a transcendent personal being.